Welcome to this part 3 of the Opportunity Zone Meetup. Our topic for this evening is on workforce housing, and we're looking at how opportunity zones may help fill the gap in housing for workers and low income. And at this point, I'm going to present this new model that I've been working on for a while to explain how it works and let you try to understand it, and why I think this may create better mechanisms to make this a privately funded, or it could be a public-private style funded project with opportunity zones kind of is the middle part of that. So typically when somebody talks about building residential housing, you have the usual players. You have investors, you have the developers, you have the contractors, engineers, and then they interact with the property owners and the government, and everything comes together well. The property goes up. It may be a rental property, apartments. It may be a condo, although not very commonly in this state, or it might be a single family residence, could be any kind of a thing. But it goes through a common cycle. And again, part of the challenge that we're having today is that a developer tries to put all this together, and by the time they've acquired the land, raised the money, done all the construction, they're now looking at rents which are pushing the limit of what a person may afford, particularly if they're in lower income, and even if they're working, they're in a lower income job, so that they can't quite get there from here. So we're going to talk about how we might be able to use Opportunity Zone money to advance this cause, see what we come up with. So in this case, ordinarily, as I said, a business would acquire the property, it would seek out Opportunity Zone investors, and this is being done every day. We know a lot of people here in Denver and across the country who are doing Opportunity Zone investments, single family, multi-family, that are creating more housing for people. And this is the ordinary model. This is the way it's commonly done. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get more investors to put more money into this, particularly for things that are set up to create the needed workforce housing. So what we did is we changed the model around, and we gave a new role in this game we're going to play, where the employer or a group of employers within a community are going to play the major role in making this happen. So as we are working through this, we would go to an employer in a community, particularly one who has a problem getting workers because there isn't enough housing in the community. They are essentially stuck in their own business model because the lack of housing means the lack of workers. Lack of workers can't implement their plan. They can't grow. They can't relocate. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to ask them to commit to buy this property at the end of the 10-year cycle. So we're creating an automatic exit for the investors, the Opportunity Zone investors, and we're going to do this by either a fixed price, a set price, or some kind of a floating price that will assure the investors some minimum rate of return, and also put the employer in a position where they're not upside down on this particular project. There's no guarantees on that second part, but hypothetically right now, just assume that the employer has a right to buy this property at 12% below market price at the end of the 10-year time period. And I'll come back and explain why we chose that threshold. Okay, so that's the first commitment that the employer would make. And by doing this, then if you're trying to raise money into an Opportunity Zone fund for a project, instead of saying it'll be whatever the market is, you're saying, no, we have a person who's a company with resources who's going to buy it at this price. So you know you're going to make a rate of return on this particular project. And that's very attractive because the 10-year hold is viewed as a high-risk unknown, and very few people are accustomed to making a long 10-year investment. And a lot of the feedback I'm getting on Opportunity Zone is, wow, I've never invested for a 10-year time period. I'm not sure I'm comfortable doing that. I'd rather make a bad investment in short term where I know what the outcome is than a long-term investment that could pay higher when I don't know what it is. It's just a natural aversion to the long-term project. The employer will make a second level commitment, which is they will guarantee the commercial mortgage on the property. So without putting any cash down, the Opportunity Zone business, who's acting as the developer, would go, take the money from the Opportunity Zone investors and leverage that as much as they can with a commercial mortgage, standard commercial mortgage. But when they go to the commercial mortgage company, they're carrying with them a guarantee of the note that comes from the employer. So this is improving the security of the transaction, the likelihood that there will be any downside or loss, and it may also allow you to get a lower rate on the commercial mortgage because the security is higher. You not only have the land that's been acquired, you have the enhancements to the land through the improvement, whether it's a fix and flip or new build, but now you have one or more employers who are acting as co-signers on this note to protect it. So that makes it easier to fund, and it makes it easier again to get investors to put money into this particular deal because they're not hanging all by themselves when they have a guarantor sitting here behind the note. On the third level, the employer is going to arrange for their employees to be the tenants in this housing. So it's a rental setup to begin with. And we've been running numbers on this, and we haven't done a hard simulation, but we're working on that now. But because of the fact that you're renting it in this program, the cost of rent, which ordinarily would include a recapture of principal, is taken off the table. You push it outside of the 10-year zone, you're going to deal with that when the property is acquired by the employer. So the rents only have to include operating administrative expense and any interest that you're going to put into this, which means you may be able to create a below market rental rate and still create a profit within this particular model. And again, it's going to vary upon a number of circumstances. But now you have employees who are being recruited to come work for an employer, and one of the perks is, well, if you're one of these people we've recruited, we've got housing, which is good housing, and two, it may be below market rate, so this is a good thing, and this is how we can get into lower income brackets, because we've taken the principal out of this business model and make it like a balloon note that's pushed to the back end of the deal. Then the fourth part is that the employer will commit to, upon buying the property, to resell it to their employees. So they're basically going to buy and flip. After 10 years in this model, when all the Oz investors have reached their threshold, now qualify for maximum tax incentives, then the employer buys the property from the Opportunity Zone business, and they turn around and resell it to their employees. And the reason I use the 88% of market value as a potential marker is that at that point, the employer could buy the property from the Opportunity Zone business and resell it for full market rate to their employees and pay a 10% down payment on that property on behalf of their employees and still make a 2% profit in the deal. So it's like they have a carried interest in the project throughout the entire time. They've got no cash in it. They had to guarantee it. They had to keep the property occupied, so if there's a vacancy issue, that will fall on them. But through this entire deal, this whole thing has been built out, and they may get a 2% participation in the market value at the end of 10 years, and they turn around and sell this to their employees, pay the down payment, which moves them from renters to owners, and it enables people who otherwise wouldn't have the cash to become owners, and everybody comes out ahead at this particular point. So what we would be doing is the employer, as one of the things, make a commitment to an employee benefit program that might also mix with a stock program or other things that are in their package where this works. And there's probably some nuances in it, and here are some other tax benefits we haven't had time to get into if they do it within the right type of program. So the employer may be able to expense some of these things in the right fashion as it goes along. So what we have done at this point is, we'll come back to this in a moment. We brought the employer in as a major player. And we're saying because of their participation, we now have an exit for the investors. The exit is a guaranteed price point. It can be set, as I say, at a certain level, or it can float with the marketplace. If you float, you'd float it at somewhere between, anywhere between 2 to 12% below market rate, so that the employer has a chance to participate in the profits. So they're incentivized to do this to cover some of their risk associated with all these things. And at the same time, they have the ability to make a down payment on behalf of their employees, so there's a seamless transition in selling this particular property. If they do it in this fashion, the investors now have an exit. We have the employer getting the benefit of housing so they can recruit people in. The employees may be able to get a below market rate on the rents during this time period, and they have an opportunity to transition into owners of those houses at the end of the 10-year time period. Now, I am looking at the possibility of doing a shorter time period, but I have to look at how that impacts the opportunity zone and whether you have to do some rollovers and some other complications. So this is the simplest form of this model at this time. So at the end of the time, everybody benefits. The community now has new money from opportunity zone investors. Investors have a rate of return with a reasonable certainty of what they're going to get when they get out. The employers got their workers, and the employees have houses, both short-term and long-term, with things that allow them to get from here to there. So at this point, the key on this is this next step, is that at the point in time that the Opportunity Zone business is considering doing this, and we had a meeting today, we're working on a 5-acre parcel in Arvada that has been partially approved for 56 units. But we're talking with the city about either bumping the number of units for a higher density in order to make this workforce housing, and we would be structuring a deal where the city's kind of a partner in this. We get permission to build it this way if they give us more density. But at the point where you're ready to start the project, you would work with local officials, economic development people, chambers of commerce, and say, who are the employers in this area who are the right size and scale? And in our conversation today, the Jeffco school system popped to the top. They have teachers right now who are already complaining there's not enough housing here. We're having trouble working here without long transportation. So this might be something where the Jeffco School District or a foundation associated with the school district or some other foundation might come into this investment saying, I want as an impact investor to make this happen. I may not be an Oz investor, but I'm willing to be, as an employer, commit to this type of a program to buy the building, all the buildings at the end of the 10-year time period. So we'd basically canvass the community, identify everybody who's got a shortfall. We would meet with them and explain the program to them, and we would get a letter of intent, soft commitment that says, yes, I want so many units. And you would be trying to pick up the total units in your proposed project. You don't have to have them all, but you'd want enough of those to know that you feel comfortable you can close the whole thing out. And you would get a soft commitment at that time. With the soft commitment in time, then you're structuring the buyout deal and all these things. You then put together your Opportunity Zone Fund, you put together your offering, and you tell the investors, you put your money in here, you've got a guaranteed exit here, and here's a price point that you're going to get however you set that. And now you've got the ability to differentiate yourself from the other Opportunity Zone projects that do not have this impact that's taking place. And you've expanded the scope of people who might invest in this to include impact investors and social type investors. And once the money's in the bank, okay, from your Oz investors, and then at the time of the commercial loan, then you would formalize the agreement with the employers. You would have them guarantee the loan for the commercial mortgage. You would have them set up the program to do the rentals, which you would be doing otherwise. They're just appointing their employees, say, go to the Opportunity Zone business, rent from here, here's the price point. And that would all be agreed upon, all calculated out. And then you've got a buyout agreement where they agree to buy the property, and that's under contract. It's sitting there waiting for the 10-year term to be fulfilled. And now you've got it all papered up. The Opportunity Zone business has the money. It's borrowed the money to make the balance. It's got a potential buyer sitting in the future. It has tenants already lined up who are the employees of this employer or the multiple employers that you're working with. And it's in motion for 10 years. And at the end of 10 years, the clock passes go at 10 years. The employer steps in, buys the property at the fixed price. That money goes into the Opportunity Zone business. It buys out the equity portion that's held by the fund. So that's the capital exit for the investors in the fund, and the fund is dismantled, and they report the capital gains on that sale to the IRS. The IRS says, that's all free to you. There's no taxes on that because you met all the qualifications. So the Opportunity Zone investors are in and out. They've got their money. They got their tax incentives. Again, the employer has workers throughout this time period, and the employees have housing and the ability to convert that housing from rental to ownership at the end of the term. And so timing on this is that to set the table properly for this kind of thing before you create your fund, you want to have these soft commitments from enough employers to make this a done deal. And those things will go into your offering documents as we've talked to the following groups, whether it's the school system or a local large employer, and you've got enough things to fill your units. So essentially what you've done is you've created a paint by number kit, and then you painted in every single color, and this thing is a done deal. You're just going to now walk through the steps for 10 years until this whole thing locks down, and after all the property changes values and hands at the end of 10 years, you're done. So by doing this, what you now have created greater incentive for investors to come into this. You have addressed the workforce housing problem in the community, and there's not any government money in it at this point. That doesn't mean government money can't participate, because the government can come in and play different roles like we talked about earlier. They could do a municipal bond, they might come in with other housing authority, they might help subsidize that acquisition so the employer doesn't have to put up the full 10% in order to do the transition. There's all kinds of things. And if he hires nothing but veterans, he doesn't have to put up the 10%. The employer gets to pocket that money. That was just occurred to me as a bonus in here. Yeah, an incentive, hire a vet. So this is basically what the model is that I wanted to share with you that we're looking at. And on this particular property, we're doing a few other interesting features of conservation easements and so forth, which will be a story for another day. But we're hoping to map this all out on paper, and then we're going to go into the community and we're going to do exactly what I'm talking about here. We're going to find every employer, and we're going to ask all the economic people in the community, EDCs and so forth, to help us identify those and get those soft commitments. And we know that this is, because this is just new enough, there'll be a bit of a educational issue, but when they're telling us, no, we know workforce problem is, workforce housing is a problem here, we got to do something about it. Well, here's a way to do that. And even if it's a government agency and they can't make this kind of commitment, they might find somebody who will do it on their behalf. So that's kind of what we're looking at on this. And so at this time, I'd like to take questions on this, and then we'll come back in part 4.
I mean, this really gets at the importance of the public-private partnership and the local leadership, and that's why I was thinking about like the state element of, because you look at some of the shortages of workforce. I mean, whether it's nursing care, senior care, or the teaching. And you start to combine these things, you stack them, like you said, the different businesses in the opportunity zones, and you can really find that traction. Like I mean, for example, the wage issue of if you're entrepreneurial, you have a huge upside. I mean, the market, the scalability. But if you're just serving public, in terms of education or senior housing, but these risk factors, how do you stack them up, or how do you isolate them on a one-off for the, what is the kind of ideal workforce? So I mean, is it attracting a new industry to a town where you see that, in the economic development realm, or is it more on the public service side that you see this housing solution?
The question is, where would be an optimum implementation of this model? And is it likely to be in a public sector situation where we know we may have lower wages and there's no entrepreneurial upside to it, or may it be somewhere else? And my current guess, until we get a live model going, is we're going to see a number of different situations where it works well. We're looking at a senior housing on the western slope, and as much as it's a straightforward thing, if we know that we're going to have 12 full-time staff working there, we might actually carve this thing where this is the senior housing component and this is the workforce housing component, and we may bring money in from different directions, making the whole thing more fundable. And what I have found, where you have more options of where money comes from, the higher probability you're going to get a compounding effect the way you want. At the same time, I know one rural community, they just opened up a factory, they're planning to open up a factory, and they need 100 workers there. And I talked to the local economic development person. I said, so you have a housing problem? He says, yes, no one else thinks I have a housing problem. I go, you have a housing problem. The community does not have 100 houses in inventory here, and they're definitely not, what you do have in inventory isn't necessarily going to be attractive enough to cause somebody to relocate from an urban area out here, but you might get a lot of rural people and be just fine, but you have a housing problem. And it may be you cannot open the doors until you come up with that symbiote partner project. And by doing that, you're also addressing the gentrification issue. So if there's pushback from the community that this is going to raise all property values, you go, yeah, but it could be one of your property values. And there's nothing quicker to take the opposition out of the picture than by bringing them into your side of what's going on. So I don't have a good answer today, but I mean, clearly the schools are, we know in multiple communities right now, they're looking at opportunity zone housing just for teachers. I mean, that's something that's being done, I think, in Glenwood Springs. It may be, yeah, I think it's Glenwood Springs where they're working on that now. And so we know it's there, but so what can we do to make this easier for them? And my knowledge, there is not this kind of participation taking place from an employer that makes it easier for an investor to feel comfort, that they're not buying into a housing project where somebody leave after 3 years, and what are you doing with the vacancy rate? Who's covering the mortgage? Who's doing those things? So we're trying to address the common issues, and yeah, we're going to try to put this into play. We'll do a paper model simulation. We'll give that to everybody, and then we're going to try to get a couple live projects and see if we can't get one full tilt up and going before the end of the year. Any other questions on this part? Okay, let's take a short break.